is not simply the way life comes to us, but is the way all things really exist. In these talks, I've had to say a good deal about prayer. And before going on to my main subject tonight, I'd like to deal with a difficulty some people find about the whole idea of prayer. Somebody put it to me by saying, I can believe in God all right, but what I can't swallow is this idea of him listening to several 100 million human beings who are all addressing him at the same moment. And I find quite a lot of people feel that difficulty.
Hello again. My name is Steve Turner, and today we'll be continuing our discussion of Mere Christianity, a book by C.S. Lewis, where Dr. Lewis makes the case for Christianity. Again, little context here. This book is a result of radio broadcasts he had back in the early 1940s during World War II in Britain. So he did these small radio pieces, usually 10 to 15 minutes, and it occurred over 3 years, 1942, 1943, and 1944. And later he put these together in this book, Mere Christianity, which basically is his interpretations of what Christians believe. So in the first couple of lessons, we went through the part of the book that's titled Right and Wrong as a Clue to the Meaning of the Universe. And basically the crux of those two lessons was that we have a situation where within us as human beings we have this pulling between right and wrong, good and evil. And then the question is kind of where does that come from? And the result of that is going to bring us to a place where we have to come to grips with the universe in general and how it began and what continues to drive the universe. So today we're going to start a lesson on the second part of the book. The second part of the book is entitled What Christians Believe. And so again, you have to remember this is C.S. Lewis. He's not a theologian. He's not a preacher. He's simply a professor of literature at one of the universities in England. But he's a very renowned scholar. And so he was asked to give an interpretation of what it means to be a Christian. And so this is his response to that. Now, as we've mentioned before, we usually start these lessons as you would in a traditional Sunday school class in a traditional Christian church. So what that means is we read the text. We usually have a text. A lot of times in a Sunday school class it'll be a Bible, but sometimes it's a book. It's like this. And so we read from the text, we stop, we discuss, and then we read some more until we run out of time. And so that's the process we go through here. So let's go ahead and do that. We would turn to our text. And the first part of what Christians believe starts with the rival conceptions of God. So this book, What Christians Believe, is composed of 5 sections: rival conceptions of God, invasion, shocking alternative, perfect penitent, and practical conclusions. So in this lesson, we're going to cover the first 2, rival conceptions of God and invasion. So let's go ahead and start. I've been asked to tell you what Christians believe, and I'm going to begin by telling you one thing that Christians do not need to believe. If you are a Christian, you do not have to believe that all other religions are simply wrong all through. If you are an atheist, you do have to believe that the main point in all the religions of the whole world is simply one huge mistake. If you are a Christian, you're free to think that all those religions, even the queerest ones, contain at least some hint of truth. when I was an atheist, I had to try to persuade myself that most of the human race have always been wrong about the question that mattered to them the most. When I became a Christian, I was able to take a more liberal view. But of course, being a Christian does not mean thinking that where Christianity differs from other religions, Christianity is right and they are wrong. As in arithmetic, there is only one right answer to a sum, and all other answers are wrong. But some of the wrong answers are much nearer to being right than others. So the first big division of humanity is into the majority who believe in some kind of God or gods, and the minority who do not. On this point, Christianity lines up with the majority, lines up with the ancient Greeks and Romans, modern savages, Stoics, Platonics, Hindus, Mohammedans, etc., against the modern Western European materialists. Now I go on to the next big division. People who all believe in God can be divided according to the sort of God they believe in. There are two different very ideas on this subject. One of them is the idea that He is beyond good and evil. We humans call one thing good and another thing bad, but according to some people, that is merely our human point of view. These people would say that the wiser you become, the less you would want to call anything good or bad, and the more clearly you would see that everything is good in one way and bad in another, and that nothing could have been different. Consequently, these people think that long before you got anywhere near to the defined point of view, the distinction would have disappeared altogether. We call a cancer bad, they would say, because it kills a man. But you might just as well call a successful surgeon bad because he kills a cancer. It all depends on the point of view. The other and opposite idea is that God is quite definitely good or righteous, a God who takes sides, who loves love and hates hatred, who wants us to believe in one way and not another. The first of these views, the one that thinks God is beyond good and evil, is called pantheism. It was held by the great Prussian philosopher Hegel, and as far as I can understand them, by the Hindus. The other view is held by Jews, Mohammedans, and Christians. All right, so first of all, he begins with this, remember, rival conceptions of God is the title of this section, and so he starts to break things down. The first is pretty simple: those who believe in God, or a God, or lots of gods, and those who do not. The second division is those, when you go to the division of people who believe in gods, the second division is those who believe that God is good, and those that believe there's neither good nor bad in this God. So he's starting to make his way down. Now remember, he's not anywhere near where we as Christians would be. So he's really starting where we think of in the Bible as in Genesis. But he's not there yet. He's not there where God created the world, so to speak. He's almost there, but he's not there yet. And then he says, if a good God made the world, why has it gone wrong? And for many years, I simply refused to listen to the Christian answers to this question, because I kept on feeling whatever you say and however clever your arguments are, isn't it much simpler and easier to say that the world was not made by any intelligent power? Aren't all your arguments simply a complicated attempt to avoid the obvious? But then that threw me back into another difficulty. My argument against God was that the universe seemed so cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. Thus, in the very act of trying to prove that God did not exist, in other words, that the whole of reality was senseless, I found I was forced to assume that one part of reality, namely my idea of justice, was full of sense. Consequently, atheism turns out to be too simple. If the whole universe has no meaning, we should never have found out that it has no meaning. Just as if there were no light in the universe, and there are therefore no creatures with eyes, we should never know it was dark. Dark would be a word without meaning. So again, he comes to this conclusion. When he was an atheist, his arguments didn't hold up. We've often said, we've said that C.S. Lewis is a master of logic, a master of rational thinking. And he would make the point that a rational thinker would come to the conclusion there is a God, and then he would come to the conclusion about God that there's a reason that he would send somebody like Jesus to earth. And that's basically the crux of this book. Now, the second section is the one that maybe I like the most. He calls it the invasion. Okay? So the next two sections are going to be the invasion and the shocking alternative. And you can imagine what that is. So let's go ahead. Very well then, atheism is too simple. And I will tell you another view that is also too simple. It's the view I call Christianity in water. The view which simply says there's a good God in heaven and everything is all right, leaving out all the difficult and terrible doctrines about sin and hell and the devil and redemption. Both of these are boys' philosophies. It is no good asking for a simple religion. After all, real things are not simple. They look simple, but they are not. The table I'm sitting at looks simple, but a scientist will tell you what it really is made of, all about the atoms and about the light waves rebound from them and hit my eye and what they do to the optic nerve and what it does to my brain. And of course, you find what we call seeing a table lands you into mysteries and complications which you can hardly get to the end of. Now, many of you are watching this on a television or a computer or some kind of visual means. The engineering and everything that lies behind what you're seeing is very complicated. It is not simple. In fact, we start with electricity, a very complicated idea, but one that we as human beings have been able to harness and enjoy. So he continues, besides being complicated, reality is usually odd. It is not neat, not obvious, not what you expect. For instance, when you have grasped that the Earth and other planets all go around the sun, you would naturally expect that all the planets were made to match. All at equal distances from each other, say, or distances that regularly increase, or all the same size, or else getting bigger or smaller as you go further from the sun. In fact, you find no rhyme or reason that we can see about either the sizes or the distances. And some of them have one moon, one has 4, one has 2, some have none, and one has a ring. Reality, in fact, is usually something you could not have guessed. That is one of the reasons I believe Christianity. It is a religion you could not have guessed. If it offered us just the kind of universe we had always expected, I should feel we were making it up. But in fact, it is not the sort of thing anyone would have made up. It is just that queer twist about it. It has just that queer twist about it that real things have. So let us leave behind all these boys' philosophy, these oversimple ideas. The problem is neither simple, and the answer is not going to be simple either. What is the problem? A universe that contains much that is obviously bad and apparently meaningless, but containing creatures like ourselves who know that it is bad and meaningless. There are only two views that face all the facts. One is the Christian view, that this is a good world that has gone wrong, but still retains the memory of what ought to have been. The other is the view called dualism. Dualism means that the belief that there are two equal and independent powers at the back of everything, one of them good and the other bad, and the universe is the battlefield in which they fight out an endless war. I personally think next to Christianity, dualism is the manliest and most sensible creed on the market, but it has a catch to it. The two powers or spirits the good one and the bad one, are supposed to be quite independent. They both existed from all eternity. Neither of them made the other. Neither of them has any more right than the other to call itself God. Each presumably thinks it is good and thinks the other bad. One of them likes hatred and cruelty. The other likes love and mercy, and each backs its own views. Now, what we do mean when we call one of them the good power and the other bad. Either we're merely saying that we happen to prefer the one to the other, like preferring beer to cider, or else we're saying whatever the two powers think about it, and whichever we humans at the moment happen to like, one of them is actually wrong, actually mistaken, it regarding itself as good. Now, if we mean merely that we happen to prefer the first, then we must give up talking about good and evil at all. So let's stop here. If it ever you talk about good and bad, if it ever that's entered your conversation, then there's a problem. Because where did the good come from? Good implies that a fall from good is bad. And so you can put this in any kind of situation. If dualism is true, then the bad power must be a being who likes badness for its own sake. But in reality, we have no experience of anyone liking badness just because it's bad. The nearest we can get to it is cruelty. But in real life, people are cruel for one of two reasons. Either they are sadists, that is, because they have sexual perversion, which makes cruelty a cause of sensual pleasure to them, or else for the sake of something they're going to get out of it: money, power, or safety. But pleasure, money, power, and safety are all, as far as they go, good things. The badness consists in pursuing them by the wrong method, or in the wrong way, or too much. But no one ever did a cruel action simply because cruelty is wrong, only because cruelty was pleasant or useful to them. In other words, badness cannot succeed even in being bad in the same way which goodness is good. Goodness is, so to speak, itself. Badness is only spoiled goodness. He goes on, to be bad, we must exist and have intelligence and will. But existence, intelligence, and will are in themselves good. Therefore, we must be getting them from the good power, and even to be bad, we must borrow or steal from his opponent. And do you now begin to see why Christianity always has said that the devil is a fallen angel? So again, he's moving towards a place. He's moving us towards this idea of God and why he would send a person to earth and what would be the purpose of that. So again, remember what Christians believe. The difference between dualism and Christianity is Christianity thinks that the dark power was created by God and was good when he was created and went wrong. Christianity agrees with dualism that this universe is at war, but it does not think this war is between independent powers. It thinks it is a civil war, a rebellion, and that we're living in part of the universe occupied by the rebel. Enemy-occupied territory, that is what this world is. Christianity is the story of how the rightful king has landed. You might say landed in disguise, and is calling us to take part in a great campaign of sabotage. When you go to church, you're really listening in to the secret wireless from our friends. That is why the enemy is so anxious to prevent us from going. He does it by playing on our conceit and laziness and intellectual snobbery. I know someone will ask me, do you really mean at this time of day to reintroduce our old friend the devil, hoofs and horns and all? Well, what the time of day has to do with it, I do not know. And I'm not particular about the hoofs and the horns. But in other respects, my answer is, yes, I do. I do not claim to know anything about his personal appearance. If anybody really wants to know him better, I would say to that person, don't worry. If you really want to, you will. Whether you like it or not, when you do, is another question. At this point, the invasion is who? Well, C.S. Lewis says the invasion is the devil. And we see that if we go back to our Bible. That's why Genesis is such an important foundational book for us. Because in Genesis, almost right out of the chute, so to speak, what happens? Well, God creates the world. He then creates human beings. The next thing that happens is there is an invasion, so to speak, because the devil does what to the human beings? He tempts them. He says to them, why can't you eat this fruit from this tree of knowledge of good and evil? And they say, I wonder why. He says, you can eat this fruit, and when you do, you will be like a god. That is always the temptation that we face. And so, C.S. Lewis is making the point, there is a devil, and he's after our souls just as much as God is. So, there has to be something, a response. God has to do something. God has to respond to this fallen nature, or this fallen angel who's in the process of winning over the humans, the human beings that he created in his image. And so the next few sections are going to deal with with God's response. Now you got to remember, C.S. Lewis is a layman, and he's trying to, even though he's an intellectual, he's an academic, which makes sometimes his writing a little thick, so to speak. He's trying to lay out as simply as possible what Christians believe, what Christians universally believe, not what different denominations, what separates different, and he will say, you have to choose what church you go to. You have to choose which Christian denomination or which Christian group you will be a part of. But he says it's very important to be a part of some group. So, what we see now is he's laid the foundation of a God who is good. He's laid the foundation that there is an evilness in the universe, and this evilness was not independent. It was a fallen creature, so to speak. It was a fallen entity. That what we have is a deviation for goodness, which is what we call evil and bad. And that now we here on this earth, we're involved in a struggle. We're involved in a struggle between evil and goodness. And so the good God is going to respond to that, and that's really the story of the Bible. The story of the Bible is the war between Satan and God, and how God helps us as human beings to overcome Satan and become, like we were originally intended, his people. So we'll end there for today, and thank you again for sharing this time with us, and we'll continue this discussion in our next lesson. Thank you.